Friendships in youth are very important, but unfortunately, it is not so easy to find someone you can be sincerely friends with for a lifetime. Under the guise of goodwill, mercantile motives, or something even more sinister often lurk. It is not always possible to recognize such manifestations in time, and such an oversight can be fatal. Britney Ujlaky lived in a small, cozy town in Nevada, USA, with a population of about 20,000 people. In that area, mining, which forms the basis of the economy, is the main source of employment. Jim Ujlaky came there from Colorado Springs with his wife Alicia, his son James, and his daughter Britney, hoping to find work and provide for his family. This event in the family's life took place in 2001. Jim was looking forward to immediately taking a position at a local company to work in the gold mines. All the family members were happy because they considered the new place ideal for living, and things really did go well for them. Britney Ujlaky loved riding horses, and there was a wide range of them in the area. Horse breeding and rodeo were traditional activities and hobbies of the locals, and this atmosphere immediately attracted Britney. There was also beautiful wildlife, opportunities for riding and quad biking, which Britney enjoyed. Of course, it might seem like a hobby for boys, but in these parts both boys and girls were welcome, which only boosted Britney's image as a pretty girl. She was very close to her brother James, as they were only about a year apart in age. Because they were so close in age, they got along well, spent all their time playing together, and shared each other's passions. Such feelings, however, were present throughout the entire Ujlaky family. They were close-knit, loving people who never abandoned each other, even in difficult moments. When the parents decided to divorce, the mother and father resolved all issues calmly in order not to traumatize the children. After that, the two maintained a friendly relationship. Even in dividing up property and settling custody, there were no problems. The former husband and wife reached an agreement without conflict. After the separation, Alicia moved out of her former husband's house, but settled nearby so that they could continue to raise the children together and avoid subjecting them to unnecessary moves. Mother and father took turns picking up their son and daughter and stayed in constant communication. This approach helped soften the traumatic divorce process, which inevitably affects any child. Thanks to these measures, Britney grew into an intelligent girl with strong moral principles and convictions. She was very independent and not afraid of difficulties. From an early age, she had helped her father and mother around the house, and she was entrusted with fairly responsible tasks. Britney always managed well. By the age of 16, she was mature enough and acted like an adult. She was skilled enough at riding to drive cattle. Working on the ranch hardened her. She learned a lot from her relatives, and even neighbors who saw the diligence and professionalism in her actions. At the same time, at 16, Britney was still a typical teenage girl with the usual interests, such as experimenting with makeup and clothes. She was very positive and sociable. After finishing school, she planned to study psychiatry at the university to help people with psychological problems. Britney had always been a good listener to people's suffering, and such activities were among her priorities. Despite all these positive qualities, Britney was bullied at school in 2020. Her best friend said that many people turned against her that year for no apparent reason. The friend believed that the main reason was envy and jealousy. Many girls were jealous of Britney's beauty and intelligence and organized the bullying. This ultimately led to her having to be taught at home. Britney was not discouraged, though. She had a small circle of people close to her who loved and supported her sincerely. She started devoting even more time to horse racing, where she met people with similar interests. That's how she met Bryce Dickey, who was a few years older than she was. They immediately hit it off and became friends. The girl always talked about him as if he were an older brother, but apparently the young man wanted more. He spent all his time with his friend. She got along well with his family, and the relationship remained friendly. The boy was described as a pleasant, polite young man who, like Britney, never refused to help those in need. Because of their similar personalities, they grew closer. On March 8, 2020, Britney and Bryce planned to meet as usual to spend time together. That same day, the girl's father had a rehearsal. He was in a rock band, and his daughter joined him of her own accord before going to meet Bryce. She was in a great mood, chatting happily with the whole group, and she also invited her friend to watch the performance. However, the young man was held up and arrived too late, so he missed the rehearsal. Bryce wanted to pick his friend up by car so they could watch a movie at his house, and then promised to bring her back. The girl's father was supposed to return around 7:30 p.m., and she had promised to be home by that time to wait for him. Britney's father came back at the appointed time, but it turned out that Britney was not yet home. He went through the rooms, called her name, but there was no answer. He grew worried and tried to call her, but Britney did not answer. Her phone was turned off. That struck him as very strange because his daughter was responsible and would have warned them if her cell phone battery was low. She was never late, and even if she was not on time, she would at least have let her family know. The idea that she might simply have forgotten to appear at the appointed time, or had lost track of time, seemed unbelievable. The worried parents turned to Britney's brother, but he too had no idea where his sister was. Then the father reached out to the last person his daughter was supposed to be with, Bryce, of course. According to her friend, he had driven around town with her for several hours and then dropped her off near the school, where she met a man unknown to him, and he left so as not to interrupt their conversation. The missing girl's father wanted to know who his daughter had met, but Bryce said he did not know the person. He described him as a tall, blond young man with a cowboy appearance. These words surprised the father. He had no idea who this stranger could be, or why Bryce had dropped Britney off with him instead of taking her home as originally planned. Bryce had never done anything like that before and had always been concerned about Britney's well-being, yet now he had simply left her with some strange guy and driven away. It all sounded very suspicious. After talking with her father, Bryce immediately sent a text message to the missing girl's brother, seeming very worried about what had happened and taking the blame upon himself for not taking his friend home. He justified himself by saying that the girl had asked him to drop her off there. Now he realized the situation was quite serious, that something could have happened to her. He only recalled that the stranger was driving an old Ford F-150 pickup, in an unappealing color, as he put it. This made the family even more worried because nobody knew who this might be. In their circle, there was no one driving such a vehicle. Britney's family stayed up all night. They tried calling her hundreds of times, but it went straight to voicemail. In addition, her father and brother kept driving around, calling her friends and acquaintances. Just before all this, Britney had mentioned a certain young man named Jai, but had not shared details about their interactions. It seemed she was planning to meet him in the near future, which sounded like an important clue in the investigation. The anxious parents then decided to call the police. As is often the case, the station initially said that the girl had probably gone out with friends and would soon be back. But her parents knew it was Britney. She had only a few friends and none of them knew where she was. The girl had never shown signs of troubling behavior or family problems, no addictions or psychological disorders, and no recent conflicts with anyone. There was no sign of a voluntary disappearance. To everyone close to her, such a disappearance clearly suggested something bad had happened. The sheriff understood how serious their concerns were and obtained all the information he could from Britney's friends and acquaintances. The police then approached Bryce and asked him to meet them near the school so he could describe in detail what had happened after he dropped Britney off. He said that he and Britney had met in the afternoon and driven around Spring Creek as usual in his car. At some point, he received an unexpected call from his father telling him to come home immediately to run some errands. The girl, according to him, had kindly agreed to postpone their drive until the next day. The only thing she asked was to be dropped off near the school, adding that she wanted to meet her new friend named Jetty. According to Bryce, as soon as Britney got out of his car, she walked toward a green pickup in which a white man wearing a cowboy hat was sitting. Bryce glanced over, then simply drove away, not knowing whether she got into the stranger's car. The young man no longer remembered the details and did not even look at the license plate on that vehicle. At this stage, the investigators had no reason to suspect him of anything, so they let him go and continued the search in other directions. They decided to alert the public through the media in the hope that someone might have seen the man with the cowboy hat and the green pickup. Of course, the police primarily wanted to learn the license plate number of that vehicle. In addition, the sheriff contacted the phone service to determine the last place where the girl's phone had been switched on. It turned out that her phone had been active about 7 km from the school, where Britney had supposedly been dropped off by Bryce. Naturally, the police rushed to that address hoping to find new clues, but there was nothing suspicious. Britney's family and friends continued their own patrols, hoping to find something in or around town. They handed out and posted more than 500 flyers, but the residents remained silent. No one seemed inclined to help with the investigation. The girl had vanished without a trace. Meanwhile, Britney's mother created a group on social media, regularly posting new and relevant data on the search results, but that too yielded no breakthroughs. Suddenly, after some time, she received a message from an unknown number. The anonymous caller wrote that he had kidnapped Britney and demanded a ransom of $25,000. Otherwise, he would feed her to the dogs. Sometime later, he wrote again that the girl was sick and would likely die if he did not give her medication, and that he would only administer the medication if he received the money he wanted. At first, the parents considered giving in to the kidnapper's demands, but then they decided to involve the police. Britney's mother called the police station and explained what had happened. They immediately asked her to come in so they could trace the number from which these messages had come, apparently a new lead. While the police were trying to trace the caller's number, one of the leaders of the volunteer search team contacted the station, saying that while searching the area about 20 km from town, they had noticed a puddle on the side of the road that looked like congealed blood. The group got out of their vehicle to investigate. In the bushes, they found a blue tarp under which was the body of a young woman lying face down, partially undressed. The description of the items matched Britney's clothing. However, before the family could be notified, an identification was needed. Just as the police were speaking to Britney's mother, one of the investigators came into the office and told her they needed to postpone their conversation because they had to go to where the body had been found. The mother broke down in sobs. She felt it was her daughter who had been found. Her intuition was right, and she identified Britney. A few meters from the body, the forensic team found a keychain with Britney's name on it, later confirmed to belong to the missing girl. She had obviously been raped. Her pants and underwear were pulled down around her ankles. She had been strangled and her throat had been slit, which was the cause of death. In nearby bushes, officers discovered the girl's headphones caught on branches by their wires, along with a used condom and its wrapper lying next to the body. Everything was now clear. There was more than enough evidence to trace the culprit. Investigators became especially interested in the unknown JTI that people around the victim had heard about, though no one could provide concrete information. They started searching for him. The news of the murder shook the entire town. Almost everyone knew each other by sight, and such a terrible crime echoed deeply among the people. Support for the family on social media was massive, particularly from Bryce, who remained in close contact with the victim's mother, father, and brother. He helped the family, cried with them, and said he would never forget Britney, who had become a close friend to him. The investigators' work was just beginning. They needed warrants to search the girl's computer and phone and to analyze the evidence, including the DNA from the condom, which was a crucial lead. They suspected Britney might have fallen victim to an internet predator with a tendency towards sexual violence. To be cautious, they compiled and checked a list of registered sex offenders in the area who might have been involved. All of this would take time, so the investigation dragged on. Meanwhile, the police looked into the supposed kidnapper's messages. They quickly determined the phone number used to contact the mother of the deceased and demand ransom. Unfortunately, it was not registered in Nevada. It was a hidden number purchased online, so it could not be traced. But the very fact that someone was sending such messages said a lot. Clearly, there was a person who found amusement in tormenting them or wanted to profit from the tragedy. According to investigators, the one who sent these messages most likely had something to do with Britney's death. Naturally, the police first wanted to find out who Jetty was. He seemed to be a prime suspect. After checking the victim's phone data, they soon identified this mysterious man, but the investigators' disappointment was great. It turned out that Jetty had been in Alaska at the time of Britney's death. He clearly could not have been the one to rape and kill her by slitting her throat. He had not left Alaska during that period, so it was a dead end. They then checked all other men who had similar initials or cars, living in town or near where the body had been found. They identified only 2 young men, both of whom had once driven green pickups, but they were far away at the time of the crime and also had solid alibis. So the investigation hit another dead end. The police then decided to contact the victim's family again, in hopes that some detail had been overlooked. The mother of the deceased girl said that a few weeks before Britney's death, she had indeed gone out with a man who embraced the cowboy lifestyle, lived on a ranch and herded cattle, but they had split up quickly because the girl refused to become intimate with him. They had remained on friendly terms, but before that, there had been several ugly arguments in which he had wished her dead. After checking him and confirming his alibi, however, it appeared the investigation was at another standstill. Investigators were left with one last approach to finding the suspected rapist and murderer, checking all the city's surveillance videos for a green pickup truck with a cowboy behind the wheel. Luckily, there were several high-quality cameras in the direction where Britney might have been traveling in her killer's car. They had hours of footage to go through. No matter how long they reviewed the material, they could not find a green pickup. In fact, it did not appear on the school's cameras either, where the friend claimed to have dropped Britney off. However, they did find something else equally remarkable. They saw the blue Chevy pickup that Bryce himself had been driving. It did appear on camera, but he neither stopped nor dropped anyone off. He was clearly lying about the green pickup. The investigators decided to figure out exactly where Bryce's vehicle had gone. Previously, he had admitted driving around with his friend for several hours, but now, because of the camera footage, the police got a warrant for Bryce's phone data to compare his location to that of the victim. Since suspicion against him was strong, this was done discreetly so he would not become alarmed. It became evident that he had been in the vicinity of Britney all day. Their movements coincided precisely until the moment her phone was apparently turned off. In addition, his phone data showed he had definitely been at the location where the victim's body was found, after which he drove home. It was clear that the friend had been at the crime scene and had either murdered the girl himself or witnessed the crime. To confirm this suspicion, an expert analysis was needed. Bryce was promptly asked to come in for tests and to provide DNA samples. He agreed and handed over the materials, and meanwhile, the police were forced to let him go. They did not reveal their suspicions, but instead made it look like a routine check, also collecting samples from everyone close to the victim to exclude them from the suspect list. They also found fragments of skin under the victim's fingernails, and all of this material confirmed that Bryce's DNA was present. There was no doubt he had sexual contact with Britney, and it was clearly forced. Finally, Bryce was called in for questioning once more. Without revealing their actual intentions or the information they already had, the investigators asked him if he had ever been involved in a relationship with Britney, in particular a sexual one. He denied any such thing, saying he saw the girl more like a sister than a potential partner. Then the investigators slowly cornered him with questions. If Bryce was telling the truth, no traces of his DNA would have been found. But one investigator told him they had discovered a condom containing his fluids at the crime scene. Realizing what the investigator was suggesting, Bryce changed his story and began claiming that Britney had indeed flirted with him and that they had engaged in consensual oral sex using a condom. According to the suspect, after their encounter on the roadside, in the exact place where the girl's body was later found, he supposedly left her to meet another man. But now he changed the location, saying he hadn't dropped her off near the school. Bryce still insisted on the story about a man in a green pickup, maintaining that he hadn't gotten a good look at him, so he could not describe any details or recall the license plate. Basically, he was now claiming that after the other man had picked Britney up, they somehow ended up at the same place where the used condom was discarded and where the body was eventually discovered, and that the stranger had carried out the massacre. Of course, this all sounded absurd, especially given that no other unknown DNA was found on the victim, whereas there were plenty of traces of Bryce under her fingernails in intimate areas, even on her neck near the stab wound that killed her. Furthermore, phone data and surveillance footage confirmed that Bryce made no other stops, which meant this was yet another lie. Confronted with these contradictions, the suspect finally broke down and admitted that he had killed Britney, but claimed it was an accident. He insisted that she had wanted rough sex with a knife and accidentally ran into the blade in the heat of passion. Given his constant lies, this sounded entirely implausible. The 18-year-old Bryce was arrested on March 19 of that year. His house and car were then searched. Investigators went to his home, finding a few bloody items of the victim's clothing in his closet and the knife used as the murder weapon. In the trunk of his car, they found a bloody sweatshirt stained with the victim's blood, along with numerous fingerprints and DNA traces from Bryce. The victim's family announced they were in complete shock. Britney's mother, father, and brother had seen Bryce as a decent young man and their daughter's best friend, treating him almost like a son. They would never have believed he could do it if not for the overwhelming evidence. They had trusted him like a family member, and he had used that trust for the vilest purposes. The trial did not begin until May 2020. The prosecution brought many convincing witnesses, including Bryce's ex-girlfriend, who revealed who the accused really was, something very different from what people typically believed. Most town residents had considered him a real cowboy and a model citizen who would help out in times of trouble. In reality, it was all an act. As the Ujlaky family's trust in the murderer showed, he pretended to be a caring older brother figure to Britney, ensuring she got home on time and showing affectionate concern, which appeared kind but was actually driven by ulterior motives. He wanted to learn all he could about his future victim. According to the ex-girlfriend, Bryce was sometimes very aggressive and violent. He provoked arguments, and at least 4 times he had choked her during altercations. In the worst instance, she believed she was close to death, but he stopped just short of killing her. After she broke up with him, he stalked and threatened her until her parents threatened to involve law enforcement. It did not take long for the jury, given the conclusive evidence, to be convinced of his guilt. The defense lawyer vehemently advocated for him, presenting the most ridiculous speculations. After 7 days of trial, the jury deliberated for about an hour and unanimously found Bryce guilty of first-degree murder and rape. The judge sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving a minimum of 20 years. He received another 20 years for using a deadly weapon, the same for kidnapping, and an additional 10 for the rape conviction. Altogether, the defendant was given a life sentence from which he could only be released after 70 years. It is highly likely Bryce will never be released. To the great sorrow of Britney's family, Bryce never revealed his motive for the crime. It remains a mystery what triggered his aggression. However, the deceased girl's friend shed some light on it. She said that a few days before the murder, Bryce had confessed his love to Britney, but she did not return those feelings, suggesting they remain friends instead. Investigators assumed that the young man could not cope with being rejected, harbored a grudge, and when he found out that she was meeting someone new named Jetty, he lost control and decided to punish his victim and take revenge. Thank you for watching and take care of yourselves.